You're listening to Biz-Souls, the business podcast with an edge, hosted by me, Rona Lewis, and Jeffrey Hansler. Tune in for perspectives and discoveries about the changing world of business. It's time to connect to the heart, soul, and humor of how business gets done. You do that every time, Jeffrey. You know, you say action and then lean over.
Well,
did you guys see that too? Or is it just me?
No, it's just you.
Welcome to Biz-Souls. It's Biz-Souls time, Jeffrey.
Well, howdy doody.
I'm Rona Lewis.
I'm Jeffrey Hansler.
And this is Biz-Souls, where
we get to the heart and soul of business and the people that make it happen.
We are getting smoother and smoother every time we do this, aren't we?
Yes, and yeah, hopefully. We can only hope.
That's right.
Today's topic is about changing behaviors that are not working for us and
kind of like what we just did.
not letting your brain fool you into thinking you're doing the right things.
Yeah.
So what are we talking about with our topic? We're talking about changing behavior. So that means we're talking little bit about emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
And
well, actually, Jeffrey, we're talking a lot about emotional intelligence.
Well, I'm going to come up short in that discussion. So we've got a couple of points. The first point is, what if you're trapped in your current behaviors? That's not good, especially since the world is changing.
Well, and, I don't always think, changing behavior is fine if it's not working for you. However, if something isn't working for somebody else who I'm really annoyed with, I don't care to change it.
Well, the rest of us, thank you.
Yeah.
And I noticed
is
that
it bugging
you threw in the little but language with the however. Okay.
Yeah.
So main point number 2 is, why should you invest in learning to change your behaviors? Well, I think it's because the world is changing pretty radically on us. And I think business is going to change even more. I think we're just seeing the beginning of behavior changes. And then the last point is what do we always do?
Tips, suggestions, et cetera, et cetera.
We're quite predictable
Try
on those
this.
things.
I know. We're very vanilla on the format.
Yes.
And
yes,
it helps because sometimes we may give you something that's a little surprising. Okay, let's go back to point 1.
Okay, we will. All right, did a little adjustment on the soundboard there. I was coming in a little hot.
What?
I was coming in a little hot. We'd switched the things, and I had your settings, and you had my settings.
Is that why I'm hearing my voice when you?
Yes, exactly. Okay, so let's get back to our point number 1. What if you're a prisoner trapped in your current behaviors? It must be time to review and get an appeal. I like that. That was a great title.
That's you
did a great job.
Yes, and you're the one who watches Goliath every week, so.
I do. I love Goliath. Billy Bob Thornton, you're fantastic, and you dodged a bullet. Brad didn't dodge that same bullet. You did. Good for you. Okay. And I
digress.
We digress. And I absolutely think she's amazing, as an actress. Okay. So what are we talking about? I got totally distracted. I got lost. I just went through all the movies.
We are not as cool as we think we are.
No, we are
basically, not. It's, we for those of us who have a high opinion of ourselves, we
don't.
We kind of are misinformed, basically.
Yeah, we lie to ourselves.
Yeah, all the time.
Oh, yeah. And it's never our fault. It's always somebody else's fault.
That's right.
It's the world's fault. It's because this has changed. That is with that kind of thinking, you're guaranteed to kill any possibility of changing, because you're not open to feedback from the world.
Yeah. And do you think it's a result of nature or nurture?
Where do our behaviors come from? Yeah, that's the big thing. Look, I think it's a combination of both, nature and nurture. It's who you learn from, who you're impressed by when you were a kid, who were you excited with. I mean, my dad was this engineer, very stoked, very conservative, very this. The neighbor next door was wild and crazy. He was the fun guy. He was the guy that would get all the fireworks during 4th of July. As a kid, we loved him. He was the guy that had the van. We'd go camping in the van. Whereas my dad was very, camping has to be done a certain way. So it was like I had 2 different influences that affected me that way. So nature and nurture, biological product, my parents, and got a lot of nurture from, the neighbors and their parents, and also the kids and how they acted too. How about you?
I'm still taking in the fact that you had a conservative father, because the way you act sometimes. Where'd he go? I'm kidding.
Well, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And my dad, actually, for his background, no, we're going to digress. We won't get into it. We'll get into. He was an immigrant from Switzerland, came here when he was 22, and yeah, he's very proud of being an American.
So there you go. Which is fantastic. I actually thought of Dr. Stuart Brown, who is a favorite of mine because he's like the godfather of play. He started the National Institute of Play, and if you've heard me speak before, I have mentioned him because he is a staple in my learning and experience, et cetera, et cetera. And how he got started in the play research arena is that he researched psychopaths and sociopaths, and the one commonality that they had was the fact that they weren't allowed to play as kids. And that affects how your brain develops, and it affects your emotional intelligence. So all of these type people have low emotional intelligence, and they're usually narcissistic and fearful, so that if anybody says anything bad or something that they just take the weirdest thing as a slight against them and their very core of being, which is why they go shooting up schools and things like that. So
well, a lot of sociopaths, psychopaths, from things I've read, they're very intelligent.
Yeah, intelligence has nothing to do with emotional intelligence, and
which is self-awareness.
Self-awareness, yeah.
Self-management. Mm-hmm. So they don't self-manage. Maybe they are self-aware, and then they just don't self-manage. And they because they're narcissists, they manage other people. They're aware of other people and how to manipulate them. So they do it. So what does that have to do with the rest of us who are just trying to change normal behaviors? I mean, are we off track talking about emotional intelligence? How does this apply to changing behaviors?
Well, because you really have to understand how you think and what your triggers are. Just kind of go in, and it's not just about being book smart. It's about street smarts. It's fluid intelligence and crystal intelligence. Those are the official names of it. And you can be high or low in both, and also have high and low emotional intelligence.
So what's fluid intelligence?
Fluid intelligence is basically common sense. It's kind of just dealing with complex information, having conversations, trying to figure out puzzles and 2D versus 3D, and then just dealing with it. Whereas crystallized is facts, skills, learning, knowledge, that sort of thing.
So photographic memory, that'd be crystal intelligence.
Yeah, because you can
and
remember
then
everything.
fluid intelligence would be somebody who's got a lot of street smarts.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, common sense.
Okay, and so none of those again, do those have anything to do with our ability to change behaviors? And I don't think we know. I don't know if studies have been done on that.
I don't know. I personally think that the more common sense you have, the more the quicker you will see the benefits of a changed behavior.
So the only way I can relate to this is through a failure story on my part. I have a tendency to get impatient, and that's a surprise, I'm sure, to everybody. Yeah. And sometimes, especially when I own my own company, when people would take a long time getting to their point, I'd finish their sentence for them, and I was very, very good at it. And I'm sure they appreciated the effectiveness of that in meetings, right?
Oh,
that's
sure,
the way
because it cut the meeting time in half.
Yeah, it was many years later. I was on a board, and these guys were doing it. And finally, one guy said, "If you finish my sentence one more time, I'm going to go out and get a gun." Real good group I was working with.
Class act, he is.
Yeah, exactly. Except it did make the point that, hey, maybe this is something I have to deal with. So it was kind of like breaking through that. And I think maybe when you're talking about sociopaths and psychopaths, they don't care. Yeah. They don't care to be broken into. Although I still think they have that shell around them that protects them. And I had this shell, I couldn't look at the impact on change. You're laughing. What are you laughing about?
Because it's, I'm sorry, it's narcissistic behavior.
Really?
Thinking that, yes, dear, if enough people tell you that something is wrong, or roll their eyes, if it's, and you're not concerned with hurting people emotionally, of course, not like whacking them, hurting people or upsetting people or annoying people, because your thinking is just about you.
So wait a second though.
So that's a very narcissistic behavior. You don't know your audience. You're not paying attention to your audience.
Okay. So now this is where it gets a little dicey, and I love this conversation. It gets dicey because at work, managers and leaders, a lot of them think that, hey, people are going to get annoyed when they say, hey, focus on work. You need to get working on this. Hey, this is a higher priority than that. What are you doing standing around talking about this stuff? Let's get some stuff done. So at work, it almost... Is that an environment that if you have narcissistic behavior, it just supports that?
No, because the reason that you are having this behavior at work is because of the company. The reason that you're having this behavior outside of work is because of yourself.
Well, okay, so the world is changing. That's the whole thing we're talking about, is the world needs to change behaviors, that a narcissistic behavior in work isn't going to work anymore because people have so many options, and they've learned that they can't really trust organizations because organizations are basically looking out for themselves and sacrificing people maybe.
That I think that's a valid point. So why should we learn to change our behavior? That's our point too.
Well, and I think it's because, first of all, the world is changing. You're not going to stop that.
Is it?
Really? Yeah, we've got COVID. We also have different ideals. We have new generations coming up with new expectations. So you really have to adapt to it. And we've seen adaptation in how companies and organizations are run. Yeah. I mean, in the old days, there was a big separation between the executive team and the workers. I mean, the executives got everything, and the workers were basically lucky.
They had a washroom. They had the executive washroom.
Oh, exactly. And then they had secretaries and administrative assistants and all of that.
Different dining rooms.
That's going away. And now more and more people have access to information. And so we have an intelligent workforce coming. And so you can take advantage of that. So there's all kinds of reasons to change behaviors. The first thing, though, is you've got to, in my mind, you've got to be aware of you've got to let this behavior, you've got to become aware of the behaviors that need to be changed.
You have to go within. Go within.
So basically, maybe we should have titled this "Getting Past Narcissistic Behavior." Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. The higher your emotional intelligence, the less narcissistic you are. I can't say that with certainty because I am not a scientist, and I may be totally wrong. And I'm saying it anyway. This is just from my level of common sense, and that could be debated whether I have any or not. That would seem to make sense because those people are more aware. So they're more willing to change when they see that their behavior is inappropriate or whatever the case may be.
So one of the things, and this describes human beings in general, this isn't just people, we have this illusion of familiarity about ourselves. And the best analogy I heard was, it's like, okay, you've driven a car for 10 years and you're familiar with this car. It doesn't matter your familiarity with the car. You still can't predict when it's going to break down.
Right. Yeah.
And the same with us. And the breakdown is a breakdown in not being able to identify the bad behaviors that are interfering with getting stuff done at work, or behaviors that we've carried over from the past that are no longer effective, no longer appreciated, or no longer even tolerated.
Yeah.
So
well, and that's and if you have yes men around you or women, then it probably would take even longer because they give you permission for that bad behavior.
Yeah. We did a little research, and we found out that people are pretty accurate at reflecting behaviors that they both have a high emotional component and that they can see. So, for example, if you ask somebody to describe how do you think you're going to do public speaking, if they were nervous before and they got high anxiety, they'll be able to describe that accurately to you. The problem comes in with desirable traits. So with desirable traits, we have a very poor self-awareness. So for example, most people like to think of themselves as generous.
Right.
And so they rate their generosity way off the scale of what they actually do. And the same goes for intelligence.
Yeah.
That's a desirable trait, is intelligence.
I have
people rate themselves much higher on the intelligence.
I have a desirable trait.
Well, what's yours?
I want to be 5'10". That's a desirable trait. No?
Actually, no. There are ways to accomplish that. A little bone graft, a little, sawing of the bones.
Can I have someone else's legs?
Yeah, there's something like that.
That are
that'll all work.
5 inches longer than mine. Okay, sorry.
And then one of the other things is our desirable trait is we want to be non-biased. And so people are like, I am not biased. So they have a bias on
It's a
their
horrible
awareness
circle.
of bias.
Yeah.
It's just a catch-22.
Yeah.
And
They're biased about their bias.
yeah, and then our brains, we know our brains can blind us to things that we're not looking for or focused on, and they can also blind us to things that we don't want to experience.
That's why we can't see the color blue if we're not looking for it.
So again, this kind of gets to how do you get to emotional
You
intelligence?
just ignored that color thing. Okay, fine.
I'm sorry.
No.
I
Because he wasn't listening.
I was thinking about what I was going to say. I'm so sorry. What did you say? Repeat it.
I said that's why people can't see the color blue if they're not looking for it.
What if you're colorblind?
Oh, that's right. You're colorblind.
The colorblind.
You're screwed, baby.
It's not really bad. It was bad enough to keep me out of the academy. Anyway.
At least that's what they told him.
Yes,
Okay.
exactly. So we've talked about EI and we've talked about some of the issues of it. Why don't we... I want to hit some facts.
Oh, you love your facts.
I do love facts.
Throw them in there, baby.
So one of the things about emotional intelligence that we really need to focus on for the new world is empathy.
Yes.
And that's one of the behaviors we need to change. Correct? We need to have more empathy for what's going on. And more empathy means instead of having the people mold to the organizations, which organizations don't mold, their manager and leadership needs to mold and develop more empathy for what's going on and open themselves up. For example, again, not to reiterate this for the millionth time. Sorry about that. It was a glass in the way.
I told him to move the glass,
and
he didn't. So there you go.
So, yeah, why listen? Empathy.
High emotional intelligence.
Okay. I've lost my train of thought. Where are we?
We were at
empathy.
the study.
Oh, empathy.
Corn Ferry.
Exactly. And I keep hitting this point. Before COVID, if you asked to work at home, it was like, no, we can't have that. It's not the company policy. We don't allow it. Now, all of a sudden, it's acceptable. And there have been a lot of benefits of it. There are some drawbacks to it, too.
The horse is dead.
Okay, no, I'm going to ride that horse forever. We're going to, because some of the companies are trying to go back. They're trying to get rid of work at home. Anyway, so Corn Ferry study found they did a survey of 55,000 professionals across 90 countries, and they found women score higher than men on all 11 of 12 emotional intelligence competencies, except for emotional self-control, where there's no gender difference.
And I find that fascinating because, the white men who rule the world say that, women aren't as good in the workplace because they're too emotional. And this study says, you lie. We're basically the same when it comes to emotional self-control. And we are better at basically everything else.
Yeah, bring out that bad about just group us all together. I was never part of the old boy network. I was never invited. They
Because
didn't
you don't like to admit you're over 40. That's why. Way over 40. Anyway, go ahead.
Anyway, going on with the survey.
Yes.
Corn Ferry results, women were 86 more likely than men to be seen as consistently demonstrating emotional self-awareness as a competency, and women were 45% more likely than men to be seen as demonstrating empathy consistently.
We are more empathetic. We are the nurturers. That's the way we were brought up, and I think part of it may be in our DNA. Going back to the hunter-gatherer time that we, took care of hearth and home, and our cavemen, chased saber-toothed tigers, whatever. So I think we're naturally empathetic, which makes us better salespeople, and I believe better leaders because we take other people into
consideration.
So maybe it was getting back to Dr. Stuart Brown and play. Maybe it's the way you guys play. I mean, you play and have conversations.
We
and
share,
stuff.
yeah.
We just played. We would go and have battles, and we would have war games, and we'd have, it was all challenge, and I knew,
Challenge in what?
well, you just a lot of testosterone games, if you will.
Or,
Yeah, it's a new game. It's coming out from Milton Bradley tomorrow. All right. So Dr. Richard Boyatzis, and Doctor, if I pronounce your name wrong, I'm so sorry. You should have made it easier for people like me who can't. Anyway, research shows, however, see, I'm blaming the outside world instead of just learning.
Okay,
Research shows that if men acted more like women in employing their emotional and social competencies, they would be substantially and distinctly more effective in their work. So we can learn from women in general, and there's a lot. And basically, if we're not going to learn from women, it just says that there's a big gap, and we need, as men, we need to learn more.
yeah, fear is a very powerful thing. I think you guys overall as a species are scared to death of us. Just saying.
Well,
Which is why you try so hard to control us.
I can't disagree with that over that because, like keeping women from voting and stuff like that, that's definitely, they're trying to keep men there, keep control of them. So maybe that is, I don't know. I'm not going to quit working because of it, though.
No, I didn't say you should. Just to have, the amount of respect and pay we deserve.
Yeah. Okay.
Those are things that have to change. So, yeah.
So getting on to what we need to change, we do need to increase our self-awareness, our self-management, our critical thinking skills.
Big time.
Critical thinking skills instead of just accepting myths. And critical thinking skills turned inward is what I think is where the discovery comes, where you can see things. And I believe that my work on critical thinking skills is where I finally realized and said, these are things that are interfering with what I want to accomplish.
You mean interrupting people?
Yeah, like interrupting people. I still do it, by the way, every once in a while. It's just that
He's
I'm
not
more
that bad.
aware of it, and I do apologize, and I try not to.
He's very good at that. Yeah.
I do get
You are.
excited about topics sometimes and just have to talk.
And I appreciate, who doesn't like a good conversation?
Exactly.
That's why we're doing this.
So, based on that, here are recommendations, solutions when it all comes together. Do you want to go first, or should I start?
Well, something I do to keep just my, more, I call it more fluid thinking and just enable me to digest things well so that I am more open to change is journaling. I journal, if I don't journal 7 days a week, it's 5 or 6, and it's just, I take a couple of minutes after breakfast and write down what's pissing me off and write down who and what I appreciate. And I try to, keep, and trust me, Jeffrey knows this. I talk about, having a positive attitude and all this kind of stuff, but and I don't do toxic positivity. I'm always in a good mood. When I get cranky and I'm pissed off about something, I let those feelings out, and I am resilient enough to get over it and move on eventually, usually sooner rather than later. And the self-journaling really helps with that.
Yeah, I think journaling is very good. I know during times of stress, different times I would journal. It's a good relief. I'm out of practice of it lately. I should probably get back to it.
Yeah, because I think it helps dig through some of our unconscious bias, because when you see, I am so mad she had this reaction because I chose to do this, this, and this. And then once you see it, it's like, oh, I understand a little bit more. It just, whether you choose to change an action or not, seeing it with another sense helps it sink in better.
Yeah. And one of the things that I've heard about, and I don't know where it came from, whether it was just passing or it was actually recommended, I can't remember. This is one of those things that if you wrote an article on this a long time ago and I read it and that's where the idea comes, kudos to you. Group journaling for a manager or a leader. And what group journaling is you sit down with a group you work with, your core group, and you kind of discuss what's went on. It's like a debrief, only you kind of write down what it went and you're including your emotions and stuff like that. And then that kind of sets the stage for a healthy dialogue and discussion. And unfortunately, the reason it's not done more often is people are constantly fighting time, especially now with COVID. We've got organizations trying to get by with fewer staff. They're not making time for these things. And it's a huge, short-sighted decision, I believe.
I happen to agree. You have to give people time to discuss things, and this is a great way to do it. People can really crystallize their thoughts.
Yeah. And even if they don't do group journaling, as you said, journaling is important. Journaling will help leaders communicate their vision more effectively. It'll help improve their persuasive and inspirational speaking points. It'll help them with appropriate responses to stressful situations that may be ongoing. And it does make you more aware of your emotions. It's kind of like if you read it, you got to believe it.
Right. Especially if you wrote it.
Excuse me, Rona.
Sure.
Okay. Any strategies?
I have 4 strategies, 4 of them, and they're key. 4 key strategies for enhancing. Well, I lost my place. Thank you, because obviously I'm reading this. 4 key strategies for enhancing self-awareness and emotional intelligence. Because as we've been talking about for the past half an hour, they are pretty much the same thing. 1, take positive action. Do something. Be proactive. Don't just complain or kvetch, as my people say. And have a positive view of yourself. Know that you are capable and competent. It's if you're going to do something, trust yourself. Number 2, understand yourself. They always say you can't fall in love or, have a great relationship with anyone else unless you have a great relationship with yourself. And that starts out with being truthful with yourself. Get to know yourself and, what your triggers are, things like that. Because if you can learn to see yourself as caring and compassionate, et cetera, it increases your motivation to want to stay like that, So you can work on your self-esteem by different forms of self-care, whether it's taking a yoga class, meditation, therapy, whatever it is. Number 3, hang out with people you like. If you're with supportive people who have your back, you're always going to feel better about yourself. Hanging out with frenemies sucks. So if any relationship causes more agita than happiness, 86 it. Get rid of it. It's, I've done this. I think we actually talked about this person on an earlier podcast that I just couldn't be friends with her anymore just because of her weirdness. And I was so sad. And the fact was, she wasn't supportive. Anyway, last one, accept personal responsibility. If you screw up, admit it, and that's it. That's my story.
It's great. I was laughing because I did want to interrupt you on there.
Go ahead.
Because it just slowed down just a little bit.
Sorry.
I didn't. I held myself in.
Thank you.
Don't apologize. It wasn't your issue. It's
You're
my
right.
issue.
I'm not sorry.
That's right.
I was slowing down just to make it easier for you to understand.
I did
because
hear you.
I know you're not used to people who speak with who are polysyllabic. I guess
Oh wow.
I'm up to the P's in the dictionary.
That is great.
Okay.
So anyway, my final points, critical thinking is important in terms of making a breakthrough in terms of your emotional intelligence. And the world is adapting, and if you want to be successful, adapting with it is really important. And also, it just makes life better.
Well, like they say, the only constant is change. And sometimes you have to force yourself to be a little bit more fluid. And that's why they say you just got to go with the flow.
Very, very good.
All
and
right.
We've gone with the flow on this episode
I think
of
we're done.
Biz-Souls.
Yeah. And did we just talked over each other as opposed to interrupting? So we've both basically ignored each other, which is how we usually are. So
Thanks for spending time with us.
you know what? If you ever want to talk to us off this podcast, just look at the contact info, ask us questions. What do? We do keynotes, programs, all that fun stuff. And you get to have us like this. Yay.
Live and in person.
Yippee, skippy.
Or virtual, whichever you want.
That's right. All right. We are out. Thanks for playing with us today.
Thanks. See you next time.
You've been listening to the Biz-Souls podcast with your hosts, Rona Lewis and Jeffrey Hansler. Did you have fun? Subscribe, rate, and leave a review. It's very much appreciated. Talk to you next week.